Hello and welcome to Ludic Audio. I'm Max, and today we're going to be talking about compressors and how they work. First off, the most common misconception about compressors is that they make everything louder, when in fact, they actually turn certain portions of the audio signal down, allowing you to turn the whole thing up with less chance of clipping. To put this another way, the compressor takes an audio signal and reduces its dynamic range, bringing the louder and the quieter parts closer together. It does this by taking anything that goes over a certain threshold and turns it down. This process increases the perceived loudness for the listener, even if the audio is turned back to the same volume it was before. The most common use of compressors is in pop vocals, but it's also used in TV, radio, and most other genres of music. Now, we'll talk about the different parameters on a compressor. The first is threshold. This is the amplitude level at which compression will begin. The second is ratio. This is the amount that the audio will be turned down after it goes above the threshold. Common ratios are 2:1, 4:1, 8:1, and 10:1. Ratios below 10:1 are considered compression, while ratios above 10:1 are technically considered limiting, although in an ideal world, you'd like a ratio of infinity to 1, so that the peaks never go over the threshold. This is the main difference between a limiter and a compressor. But these amounts will only be applied to the amount that goes over the threshold. For example, if we have a waveform that goes 3 dB above the threshold, and we have a ratio of 3:1, the peaks of the audio will only be 1 dB above the threshold after compression. If you imagine the waveform as a mountain, we're essentially just chopping the high peaks off. The next parameter we'll talk about is attack. Similar to a filter on a synthesizer, this is how long it takes the compressor to go into full effect. A shorter attack time means that the compressor will turn down the volume almost immediately after it goes over the threshold. A longer attack time, though, means that the compressor will gradually turn the volume down after it goes over the threshold. A good rule of thumb for picking an attack time is shorter sounds like plucking get a faster attack, while longer sounds like a cello receive a longer attack. The next parameter we'll move on to is release. Similar to attack, the release is the speed at which the audio gets turned back up after it's been compressed. And finally, our last parameter that we'll talk about is makeup gain. After the compressor has brought down the volume of the peaks, the whole audio signal is going to sound quieter. This is where makeup gain comes into play. As you can tell by the name, it's meant to make up for the volume that was lost while compressing. It's essentially a volume knob to turn up the compressed audio signal. One of the most common practices with makeup gain is to increase the volume by the same decibel level that the peaks are being reduced. Just as an example, let's say we have an audio signal whose peaks are being reduced by 5 dB after compression. This means that we should turn the makeup gain up 5 dB to compensate for the loss of the peaks. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but if you're new to compressors, it's a good place to start. Now, let's look at a couple different software compressors. The first thing we'll start off with is a dry recording of a guitar. Let's take a listen. Okay, this is the audio file we're going to send through the compressor. Now we'll open up the effects area, and we'll be using the glue compressor inside Ableton. Now we'll activate it, and as you can see, we have all of our parameters. We have attack, release, ratio, threshold, and makeup gain. These are the parameters we talked about earlier. Okay, so I've turned the threshold way down just so we'll be able to hear the compressor working. Let me turn down the makeup gain. And normally we don't need to turn the threshold down this low, but we're just using this as an example. Okay, let's take a listen. Okay, we got about 10 dB of reduction from the compressor, so now we're going to turn the makeup gain up 10 dB. Alright, let's take another listen. Okay, now let's deactivate the compressor to hear the comparison. Let's turn it back on. As you can see, it makes the whole audio clip sound a little bit louder, especially on the quieter parts of the sustained note. Alright, now let's look at another compressor. Right here we have the Waves Renaissance compressor. It has all the same parameters as the glue compressor we looked at earlier. Although it looks different, it functions in the exact same way. We'll also be using the same audio file from the previous example. As you can see, the Renaissance compressor uses something closer to faders than it does knobs. Okay, now let's move the threshold down right below the peaks of the input audio. Okay, now we'll bring down the ratio so we can start to hear the compression. And we'll also be able to see the gain reduction in the meter just to the right of the ratio. Okay, so we had roughly 3 dB of gain reduction. So in the makeup gain, we're going to turn it up about 3 dB. We can also play with attack and release times, but this is just another example of a compressor. Thanks for watching, and feel free to like and subscribe.